I'm going to welcome Edel, Shauna and Lynsey to today's lunchtime seminar, and thank you very much, ladies, for taking the time to come out and talk to us and share your information with us today. So over to you, Edel.
Thank you, Alison. Hello, everybody. My name is Edel Walsh, and I'm a Regional Social Work Lead and Commissioner in SPPG in the Department of Health. Thank you all for taking the time during your lunch break to join us for an introduction to the framework for integrated care. Hopefully, some of you around the screen will have had the benefit of attending an introductory workshop within your trust to date. But if not, we hope you find this presentation thought-provoking and it enhances your curiosity around the FITC model and how it will support to understand the experiences of our young people from a more trauma-informed and attachment-focused perspective. FITC has been around now for about 5 years in Northern Ireland, and the first 3 years have focused upon building the framework itself and the building blocks that align to it, testing aspects of those building blocks amongst staff within trusts and developing our enhanced training packages to deliver within trusts as well. Previously, the responsibility for the development and implementation of FITC sat within the policy team of the Department of Health, being led by Tom Taggart, who's a consultant clinical psychologist who previously worked within Southern Trust. But now, as of November 24, FITC is now housed within SPPG, the Strategic Planning and Partnership Group, which is part of the wider Department of Health structures, and we used to be the Health and Social Care Board. I now have responsibility for its implementation across children's and family social work services across the region. So we're now well over a year into the implementation of our health and wellbeing plans in residential care and are progressing to test how these plans can enhance care planning for children looked after across the region. We're having a workshop with your senior management teams on the 3rd of April to look at how we can progress the implementation of FITC beyond residential care, as there's been no timeframes around this further implementation as of yet. So before I hand you over to Lynsey and Shauna, who will take you through the lunchtime seminar, I'm happy to take any questions at the end that you might have around today's presentation or the wider FITC implementation. But sit back, enjoy your lunch and enjoy. Over to you, girls.
Good morning, everyone. Just as Edel said, my name's Lynsey Black and I am the implementation lead in the Northern Trust. Okay, so we'll get started then. Next slide. So the aims of the lunchtime seminar, you can see, is firstly to provide an introductory awareness on the framework for integrated therapeutic care, which, as Edel has already said, it's kind of being termed FITC. It seems to be folk have calling it that. Second, an understanding of the current training pathways, and then lastly, an update on the implementation of the framework within each trust. Okay, next slide. So I suppose just to put a bit of context around the framework, there have been lots of different models around in each trust. We've had signs of safety, and then of course we've had the different therapeutic models. So back in 2007, each trust was asked to embed a therapeutic model within their children's homes. So you'll see from the slide, the likes Northern Trust had the care model, Belfast Trust had social pedagogy, South Eastern Trust had sanctuary, Southern Trust had the ARC model, and Western MAP. And all of these models were attachment focused and trauma informed, but they didn't do just exactly what we needed them to do in terms of delivering trauma informed care across Northern Ireland. So in 2018, there was a review done of the regional facilities, and a number of recommendations come out of that. One being that there would be one model. Sorry, can you go back to the previous slide? Sorry, Alison. No, previous one. Yep, that one. Back in 2018, there was a number of recommendations made from a regional review, one of which was that there would be one model stroke framework for all looked after and adopted children. And that was obviously how the framework came about. And the framework is slightly different in that it is obviously attachment focused and trauma informed, but that it guides trusts to meet the therapeutic and developmental needs of children and young people who are in care. And it has been based on research, international and national research and best practice across Northern Ireland. So that's what makes it a bit different than the models already that have been embedded. Okay, next slide. So this is the vision for the framework, a single regional framework designed to help trusts, their staff and partner agencies create integrated and collaborative processes through which trauma and attachment focused and rights-based services can be delivered so that all children and young people who are care experienced have the best chance of the life they deserve. And this sits really nicely with the LAC strategy, a life deserved. Okay. So we're going to watch a short video now that Tom Taggart, the guy who developed the framework, will explain. And Marie Rolston, who would have been the director in the Northern Trust some time ago.
Sorry, 1 second. This is where the technical difficulties came about. You can't see that on the screen, Lynsey, can you?
No.
Let me see. Here we go. Hopefully this will work now, folks. Is that up now?
Yeah, just needed to play.
Children cope best with stress when they have consistent, warm, nurturing relationships with family, friends, teachers, and other adults. But children can be seriously affected by stress if they experience too much or if they don't receive the support they need to be able to cope. Research has shown how the types of experiences known as ACEs can affect physical health and emotional well-being from childhood to adulthood. As well as these types of stress, adversity can be experienced in the environmental contexts of young people's lives too. Being removed from a risky situation reduces dangers, but it also means moving into an unfamiliar system, contact with multiple professionals, changes of home and relationships, and maybe school too. More stress. Children who grow up in nurturing environments with a network of positive relationships and not too much stress develop the skills and abilities they need for life. These include basic skills for controlling body systems like heart rate, breathing, and appetite, emotion and relationship skills like attachment and managing emotions, and the thinking skills needed for everyday life like language, solving problems, and making plans. Children who grow up being regularly stressed or frightened are more likely to develop oversensitive responses to stress because the parts of their brains that react to stress have received so much stimulation and activation. The ways young people can be affected are now recognised and referred to as developmental and relational trauma. Being regularly triggered into stress responses means young people have a hard time focusing on other things. So learning can be affected, and aspects of their social, emotional, and thinking skills can be underdeveloped. Having experiences of being frightened or rejected by carers can shape the core beliefs young people have about others as being untrustworthy and maybe dangerous, and about themselves as being at risk in relationships or perhaps not worthy of love and respect. Young people who've experienced significant adversity can have difficulties in some or all of these areas. So their needs are often complex, and the systems that care for them need to be able to understand and respond to this complexity. Providing therapeutic care involves paying attention to relationships and to the environment to help young people begin to feel safe. It also means being able to identify particular emotional and developmental difficulties that might be affecting a young person and providing the right interventions and supports. Trauma and adversity take away the sense of being in control that's important for our emotional well-being. So therapeutic care needs to find ways to put back or build this sense of agency and control. Help also needs to focus on strategies to deal with some of the ways young people who have experienced adversity can miss out on the opportunities for growth and participation that are readily available for others. Talking about developmental and relational trauma can make the situation sound bleak, as if young people's brains have been damaged. But actually, the very same biological processes that affect brain development in stressful environments can bring about changes when circumstances are different. Children can and do recover from early trauma and adversity. So there's good reason to be optimistic if we can create the circumstances that help this happen. Understanding how adversity affects young people helps us understand how best to help them. And all of this has helped us to shape the Northern Ireland Framework for Integrated Therapeutic Care.
Okay, so many of you will be familiar with this diagram, but just, I suppose, to highlight again that from the video, you'll know that adversity is not evenly distributed across the population, and our looked after children certainly are more disadvantaged. And you can see just why they're disadvantaged more. We have the adverse childhood experiences, but we also know now that there is adverse community environments where they have lived prior to coming into care. And if that's not enough, then when young people move into the care system, quite often you have difficult transitions, multiple caregivers that they're having to form relationships with. And so we have a situation where we as professionals are dealing with complex trauma, 3 layers. Okay, next slide. So suppose the framework very much focuses on brain development and the impact of adversity on brain development. Most of you will know a lot of this already, but it's good just to go back to basics and remind ourselves just of the impact of adversity on the young people we're working with. So I suppose just go around these individually. Emotional and behavioural regulation. Many of you will be familiar with our young people who have had their stress systems activated in early years will be either easily triggered, so very easily put into that stress response, or alternatively maybe will be quite cut off from their emotions and quite difficult to reach. Attachment development then will have been affected also. So staying safe will be the priority for our young people. And this can be played out like a child who's very, very clingy and wants to know where their caregiver is all the time. And also can also be played out in ways where they're, as I said before, quite difficult to reach and nearly closed off from their emotions. And caregivers will have to work quite hard at building relationships. Cognition is affected as well in adversity in early years. So those skills that young people would be developing, such as social skills and problem-solving skills, will have been affected because they have spent so much time in their survival state and staying safe. So we begin to see difficulties there that we will have to manage and support our young people through. Self-concept and identity development. So our young people who have been rejected and abandoned may feel then that they're unlovable and unloved, and there will be a lot of work needing done to kind of reinforce those beliefs that are wrong and building self-esteem. And lastly, sensory development. We'll all be familiar with our young people who don't know when they're full and they continue to eat and maybe hoard food, or don't know when they're hot and cold. And that's because when their sensory systems were developing in those early years and there was trauma happening, that had, obviously had a large impact on their sensory development. Okay, next slide. So this is just a diagram. It's originally from SAMHSA, and if we were asking for our organisations to be trauma informed, this is what we would ideally like them to be. So the framework will aim to do these 4 R's, I suppose they're referred to. So firstly, realise then. So if we're accepting that trauma exists within our families and the organisation, we need to realise the widespread impact of it. And potential pathways for recovery, and that goes beyond the families we're working with, but actually within the organisation, within staff teams, that there's trauma, and with individuals, professionals as well. Recognise the signs and symptoms of trauma in clients, families, staff, and others involved. So I suppose always thinking about all behaviour as communication, and recognising that behaviour is communicating something to us all the time as professionals. And that's probably easier when we're faced with someone in front of us who is maybe being triggered in a way that is visible, but often there can be physiological things going on with families or young people or staff that maybe we're not seeing. So it's just being sensitive to that all the time when we're thinking about trauma. Thirdly, responding. So if we know all this information and we're more tuned into the signs and symptoms of it, then we need to respond by fully integrating all this knowledge into policies, procedures, and practices. Many years ago, we probably responded in a way that was more a behavioural approach. And then we shifted maybe a decade ago to referring everybody off to experts. So we've been referring them to talking therapy, TT-LAC, scaffolding. But we know now with the research and literature that a neurosequential approach is needed. So multiple responses from multiple people in a trauma-informed way is what actually is most effective to help the brain recover from trauma. And lastly, resistant re-traumatisation. As organisations, we need to make sure that we're resisting re-traumatising children as well as adults who care for them. And that's just something that needs to be ongoing all the time. Okay, next slide. Any comments at this stage, or happy to move on? Happy to move on. Okay, next slide. So we're just going to watch the second video. Gives a nice summary of the framework.
The Northern Ireland Framework for Integrated Therapeutic Care is being developed to help all 5 health and social care trusts and the other organisations that support looked after young people to adopt the same approach to providing therapeutic care. The framework operates at 2 levels, at an organisational level and at an individual level. Organisations adopting the framework will commit to putting a number of essential building blocks in place. The organisational building blocks create the right environment to support the therapeutic care practices, made up of a number of essential elements. Therapeutic care involves a lot of people: foster carers and residential care staff, social work teams, education staff, the team who provide therapies, and others. Organising all of this support so that the people involved are on the same page about what needs to be done requires strong and effective leadership. So the framework will help identify strategies that help with this, like having the same policies, procedures and processes across all of the trusts, and how senior managers can lead and support this way of working. Being around young people who are in distress can cause strong, difficult feelings for carers and other people involved in young people's lives. So bringing individuals and systems together to help young people can be challenging at times. This is helped when all of the people involved share the same ideas about young people's difficulties and how to work together to help. Sharing the same knowledge base helps the people involved in an integrated way. But the framework will also describe processes for working and communicating in the caring system that will support a one-child, one-plan approach between the individuals and agencies involved with each young person. Young people need to be confident that the people around them agree with each other and know how to help. If this is not the case, then it's very difficult for young people to feel safe and secure. When young people feel unsafe and insecure, their trauma-affected beliefs about the world are reinforced and recovery cannot begin. Helping young people recover depends on the systems around them being integrated. Trauma makes young people feel they have little or maybe no control over their lives. So it's important to ensure that young people and their families are fully involved in all types of assessment, decision-making and planning about them to help them bring back that sense of control. Many processes already exist in looked after children's services in Northern Ireland to support this participatory approach. The framework will build on these ideas and processes to ensure young people are at the centre of decision-making about their lives and also fully involved in how their services are planned, delivered and reviewed. Caring for traumatised young people can be demanding emotionally. Bearing witness to the trauma that young people have experienced can be very distressing. Also, young people who have been hurt and let down by family and others are often fearful in relationships, and the defences they have developed to cope can make them hard to get along with at times. Research has highlighted the significance of the physical environment to traumatised young people. Aspects of a room or building or other surroundings might trigger stress reactions for some young people, maybe because they remind them of other places where frightening things happened, or just because the design or decoration of buildings using certain shapes and colours can be very activating. Careful design can help them feel safe. It's important that a young person's home feels as calm, comforting and containing as possible. It's also important in the spaces where young people are educated or take part in therapy so that they can be calm and really focus on engaging. The framework encourages these issues and encourages service providers to commit to considering the impact of physical spaces on young people and to adopt policies and planning activities that help manage the impact of the physical environment. Trauma affects the meanings that young people have about who they are and where they fit in the world. But a sense of identity and belonging is the bedrock of resilience and good mental health. This means it's important that all carers and staff receive the training and support needed to fully understand and help our young people keep the individual, family, social and cultural connections that tell them where they're from and what they belong to.
As well as the organisational building blocks, the framework describes essential elements for therapeutic practice. Trauma-informed care works best when all types and grades of staff understand how adversity affects young people. So workers at all levels, from support staff to senior management, should receive training to help them understand these impacts and how to provide care to help young people recover. Implementing the framework will include providing written training materials, live training, and videos like this one to help grow the carer and workforce knowledge base. We're aware of the ongoing work in this area by the Safeguarding Board for Northern Ireland, and we'll build on this work. Young people whose primary carers weren't able to keep them safe and meet their needs, or who were frightening themselves, have been harmed in the context of relationships. So relationships also have to be the context in which these harms are repaired. Relationships are reparative when they help young people feel safe and nurtured, cared about and understood. A traumatised young person whose early experiences have convinced them that adults are unreliable and frightening will only feel safe with adults after many, many experiences of them being nurturing and responsive. This change can't be achieved just by working with a therapist who's only one person in one situation. Also, if young people living in care have experiences of adults failing to be nurturing, perhaps being harsh or rejecting. The damaging beliefs they have about relationships are confirmed and recovery is harmed. So everyone in a young person's network needs to support them in a trauma and attachment-informed way. And it really is the case that every interaction counts. Therapeutic care requires collaborative, individual assessment and planning of supports for every young person. Assessment should consider how the past has affected a young person and also carefully explore the types of difficulties that young people have right now and the network of supports available to them. This should lead to an individual therapeutic or personal development plan that includes educational and vocational supports, community-based activities, sports, arts and cultural experiences, and intervention for any specialist therapeutic needs. Its aim is to help build a web of relationships and ensure access to the activities and experiences that support personal growth. The framework builds on processes in place in Northern Ireland for individual assessment and planning for a consistent, effective approach across the region. Providing consistently nurturing, responsive relationships and access to stimulating family and community life can bring about change for young people. But some of the emotional effects of trauma and the beliefs and fears caused can be very deeply held and may need time with an experienced therapist to help them resolve. All young people need help from their social workers and carers with narrative or life story work to help them be clear about their lives and relationships, what's happened to them, and how the future will be. Talking about frightening experiences in the past can be too distressing for some young people. This means that the types of help young people need should be provided in the right sequence, building each young person's sense that they're safe and cared for, helping them develop their ways of coping, growing a sense of belonging and of hope and expectation for the future, talking about trauma when it feels safe enough to do so. Young people may need help with developmental skills as well, and initially, therapy might include time with an occupational therapist to help a young person be better able to control how their body reacts to stress, or with a speech and language therapist to help them develop their skills for communicating. Some young people may have difficulties with their mood or have other developmental difficulties that mean they need help from child and adolescent mental health services. Looked after children's therapeutic teams can provide other specialist therapies to help with attachment problems and to address and process trauma when the time is right. The framework identifies therapeutic work that's relevant, processes for assessing what types of intervention might be needed, and ways of integrating and sequencing these areas of work.
Okay, everybody's still with us. There's a lot of information just within those two videos on top of these slides. So everybody okay to go on? Okay. So I'm just going to take you through this. This is the framework in its entirety, a diagram. The middle, sorry, go back to the previous slide. Okay, so the middle circle, the red circle, is the core concepts, the 4 core concepts, and the 2 surrounding circles, the purple and the blue, are the building blocks. So I'll just take you through the middle core concepts, and I suppose I would encourage you, when you're thinking about young people, depending on the area you work in, but in your teams and with other professionals, to be thinking about these 4 core concepts when you're making decisions and planning for them. Okay, so the top left then, building safety. So we know now that no longer can we just remove children from maybe dangerous situations and place them in a place of physical safety, that there's much more to it than that. And we need to make sure that we are building psychological safety, so that young people have an understanding of their story and what has happened to them, and also relational safety. So carers need to never evoke fear or shame with our looked after children, and they need to feel a sense of belonging. So there's just a wee bit more to it than physical safety. we need to be thinking all the time about relational and psychological safety as well. Top right then, getting the help that's needed. So the video has touched on this, but just to be clear, the framework is very clear at indicating that we need to make sure the children get the right help at the right time. So there's a much better team around the child approach with professionals coming together, and there should be a shared understanding of the young people's needs. So there should be earlier screening, assessment and intervention. Bottom right then, addressing inequalities. If I take you back to the slide of the tree, with all the adversity that our young people face, we know that we have a lot to do in terms of addressing some of these inequalities and discriminatory systems that we are working within. So within the organisations, there should be lots more opportunities for reflective practice, team reflective practice, and within supervision. To kind of, for professionals to be thinking about their own prejudice that they hold and the power imbalance that exists on a day-to-day basis. And then lastly, developing agency and taking part. Is anybody familiar with the term developing agency? Knows what it means?
Is it like how much control a young person has over their decisions affecting their care? And
yeah, absolutely. And the reason I asked is whenever I first went into this post, I suppose it was a term that I hadn't come across before. So just to be clear about that, the framework intends to promote the fullest level of involvement from our children and our families we're working with. And as has been touched on in the videos, so often our young people's lives have felt out of control, and they felt they had no voice. And we know that young people and families can heal when some of that control is given back to them and they have a voice. So it's so important that we do that. All right, next slide then. So now we're just going to touch briefly on the building blocks. So there's 11 building blocks. There's 6 organisational, as you can see there on the screen, and then there are 5 practice delivery ones on the next slide. I'm not going to go through each one of these in detail. The video has kind of gone through them briefly, and there's more information on the Department of Health website, the building block. There's actually a document dedicated to it, but I'll take you through some of them. So the top one then, whole system leadership. So just for everyone to know that to bring us to this point, there's been lots of leaders involved in ensuring that the trauma-informed care is taking place through Northern Ireland. The regional review that took place that I talked about in 2018 was the start, I suppose, of that. And we currently have a regional implementation team and a steering group as well. And just to highlight that the framework now is in policy as well. Physical environment, again, this was touched upon in the video. We need to make sure that our buildings are welcoming, safe and inclusive spaces for our children, families and staff. And I guess I'm thinking of our own organisation. We have a journey to go in terms of working with estates to do that. There has been progress made over the last decade, but certainly I'm sure you can all think of environments that could be more trauma informed. Supporting the care network then, there's a lot of support going in for staff and caregiver wellbeing support strategies, because we recognise that the trauma that our young people and families have experienced then obviously impacts on professionals working with them. So there's lots of working in that area as well. Okay, next slide. So these are the practice delivery building blocks. And again, the videos have touched on this, so I don't want to labour because I know we're tight for time, but understanding and responding to adversity and trauma. So there's a major push on developing our workforce and caregiver knowledge. Today being a bit of that, just building our knowledge and skills regarding adversity and trauma-informed practice. There's lots of different workshops happening. There's this introductory training, and then there's a 4-day deep dive into the framework as well. Individual health and well-being. So for those of you who are working within residential care, you'll be familiar with individual health and well-being plans that are developed and have come out of a very in-depth assessment over sort of 12 weeks and input from psychology. And I suppose what we're finding to date is that they're being well received and that benefiting the young people and staff team in a great way. So for those of you who aren't in residential, ask your colleagues, and you'll begin to see that they certainly are in motion within each of the trusts. And just the bottom one then I'll touch briefly on transition into adult life. So really, really good to hear that support for young people leaving care will be maintained and access appropriate services and build their relational networks as they transition out of care. So TT-LAC or the scaffold service, I know that they're named different in each trust currently, but they will be involved until the young person is 21 going forward. The care network meetings, or maybe core groups, you're referring to them in your trust at the minute, they will be ongoing for until the young person is 24, and they will also have access to a personal advisor until they're 25. So that is great news in terms of support for children transitioning out of care. Okay, next slide. All right, anybody heard of the Lundy model? No.
Yes, sorry there, Lynsey. Yeah, we would use it as part of our participation practice at VoIPIC.
Brilliant, brilliant. Okay, so just to highlight, the framework is using the Lundy model to really think about how we, you know, fully involve our children and young people and families through the whole framework. So for those of you who don't know, just very briefly then, we need to make sure we have a space. So have young people's views been sought, and is there a safe space for their views to be sought? A voice, have they been given a voice, and have they been given information that they need? Do they know they don't have to take part? I suppose these are all questions that we should be asking ourselves. And have they been given options on ways that they can express themselves, so different options to hear their voice? Influence then, were their views considered by those with power to affect change? And did children and young people get feedback explaining the reasons for the decisions made? And lastly, audience then, is there a process in place for communicating the children and young people's views? And do they know who their views are being communicated to? So just something to bear in mind, again, when you're working with our looked after and adopted children, but it's something that we're thinking about all the time when we're developing the framework. And VoIPIC will be glad to see your 2 documents on the screen there. So we have really considered the young people's vocabulary that they've written a document on the words that they want used for different meetings, and for likes of contact as family time that they had requested, and we've taken that into consideration when we're developing the framework, and also standards about their meetings that we would have called LAC meetings, that they've asked for those to be called young persons care and review meetings. So just there's currently a pilot happening, and we've taken all of those considerations on board when we're doing the pilots. So next slide. Okay, I think that's Shauna, that's me finished. Thank you very much.
Hi, yeah. So I'm Shauna Morrow and I'm Lynsey's counterpart in the South Eastern Trust, and I'm going to take you through the next part of the slides, but I am going to have to turn my video off, as Alison said at the start. I'm having a bit of lagging issues with my internet, so please bear with me. Thank you. So in terms of our core processes, what we're saying is actually, and what Lynsey has highlighted and identified, is really there's lots of challenges for our young people who are care experienced in terms of accessing the right supports, and we need to ensure that there's a coherent service delivery. So we need to coordinate and collaborate with multidisciplinary teams to ensure that we're working together to support the young people. And that's including both statutory and non-statutory services. It could be the voluntary sector, it could be community services, it could be engaging Youth Justice Agency or Juvenile Justice, Lakewood Secure Care and primary health care, so nursing or GPs, in terms of just making sure that we're identifying the right support. So that all falls really under being an integrated network. So everyone's working together to support our young people so that we can then develop our individual therapeutic planning. So when we're talking about a team around a child, creating a care plan, that everybody's very clear of who is doing what, that this is the right thing at the right time, and that we're measuring that for the young person as well, and that we're saying this blanket approach to what we would have done for 5 other children isn't necessarily appropriate for this individual child, and we really want to be saying we're accessing the right supports and doing the right interventions at the right time. Building upon that, then, we've introduced a reflective governance meeting. So within the region, we would all have our own governance assurances. We have our governance teams, but what we want to do with this is reflect as organisations in line with our own settings to kind of look at what are our incident trends analysis, where are pockets of work being undertaken to support the young people to reduce those incidents. So we have daily care activities being measured, where we're looking at what family time have a young person had, what diversionary activities have been provided and offered or actually used by the young people, and trying to scale that to say, look at all the support that's being offered to young people, and then look at how we've been able to reduce incidents within the home or crisis points, not negating that sometimes our young people just remain in crisis. And then what we want to do is learn from each other as a system to say, is there anything that we could do differently? Is there anything that was really good practice within those challenging experiences for the young person and for the workforce and the system as a wider level? So there's lots going on, and it's been introduced over the last year, and I'll talk about a bit more about reflective governance in a few moments, but just to highlight that that's there and what we want to achieve within that. And then within our core processes, our staff support and reflective practice. So looking at how we support people on an individual basis in line with the supervision policies, but also more than that, what does that support look like? What do the support in the workforce need? Do we have opportunities for reflective practice provided by a psychologist or therapeutic lead? And at the present time, that's now accessible to all of the residential workforce, which is fantastic opportunities. So once a month, everyone has that opportunity to reflect on where they are, not just as individuals, but as a team, and how we're responding to the young people's needs in the hope that we promote a learning culture. Next slide, please. So within the framework, what we want to do is talk about relationally focused care and intervention, so that we're looking at the network of carers working together and we're really clear on who's doing what. We want to talk about holistic screening and assessment processes, and that's to include our allied health professionals. So the region should be having access to occupational therapists and speech and language therapists to help support some of that screening for each of our young people, so that we're working with the young people at an assessed need rather than this is our interpretation of how to work with the young people. That we're providing a single shared team around the child planning and review. So we know that there's a unit training, we know that there's care planning meetings, and we want to ensure that we're all working together and we identify a care network. So everyone within that care network is part of the decision making with the child and the family to say, what are we going to do? What are our worries and how are we going to move forward? And as Lynsey discussed, the participatory working, applying the Lundy model and the VOIPIC vocabulary of care, enhancing our young people's experiences of having their voice heard and making sure that they're getting the right communication when some of the things that they would like to change are communicated at a most appropriate and individual level, providing opportunities for them to change what service delivery looks like. So we have undertaken 3 surveys within NIFITC in terms of informing policy and design and moving forward. We have engaged our young people within our young people in different forms to ensure that actually their voice is heard when we're talking about changing the systems. What is it they want to do, and how does that complement all the work being undertaken by other agencies such as VoIPIC and our own trusts individually? We want to ensure that there's an adequately resourced, knowledgeable and skillful and reflective workforce. So we want to ensure that staff training is identified, that people understand what trauma is, how that impacts our young people, the understanding of brain development and sensory development, as Lynsey's talked about, how we can adapt all of our training to the individual needs of the young people so that we have an understanding of trauma and attachment and how that can impact our young people. We want to be able to take that into then working within our therapeutic care practices and being able to be reflective then within this. So within a reflective workforce, providing then a reflective learning culture. So if we're able to learn from each other and identify there's maybe areas where we need to grow further, that's being respected and heard within this system. Next slide, please. Within our outcomes framework, so this is just quite a brief framework, and just saying that it's a pyramid, top up, bottom up approach, that for our organisation to buy into the NIFITC, we should be able to do incomes. And when we're talking about caregivers, we're talking about workforce, our kinship carers, we're talking about families, we're talking about anyone that's classed as the caregiver within this young person. And if everybody is supported and resourced and knowledgeable, the young person's outcomes should be more improved, and they are a priority area for us. But if everybody's working together, we'll absolutely see growth and change for our young people. Next slide, please. This slide is introducing our theory of change, essentially. And Lynsey's talked about our core concepts. So it's 4 periods of building safety, getting the help that's needed, being able to promote agency and take part, and address inequalities. All falls into this machine. Then what does our core process look like, so that we're linking to the building blocks that Lynsey's already talked about. Then moving into the organisational outcomes, where the whole system is committed to this, that we're saying we want to have a collaborative and trauma-informed service and have skillful practitioners and teams to support the young people, but we need to actually support the caregivers fully so that they're knowledgeable and skillful so that they can support the outcomes. So this is just applying a theory of change. Next slide, please. So within our implementation plan, so each, as Lynsey has talked about, there are regional meetings, and then we have our own implementations within our own trust. But regionally, there was a phased approach, and it's been identified. The regional review commenced in 2018. Theory was built then for kind of 3 years, and we've started really implementing within the last year. So we need to be mindful and measured that this is a phased approach, and it's going to progress over a number of years across looked after and adopted services. We know that this complex whole system change is coming at multiple different perspectives and multiple levels. So being mindful that it's the residential workforce that need to be included, it's our fostering services need to be included, it's kinship carers, it's field colleagues, it's our TT-LAC scaffold teams, all need to be involved within this process to change. And that takes time to develop and enhance. So we need to be mindful of how much time we're providing this. Dr. Karen Treisman then in 2018 had written in one of her books, it's a journey of evolving, learning and developing, and moving forward can become trauma informed. So just highlighting, lots of psychologists and other professionals note that complex change takes time, and we need to be measured in how we're approaching NIFITC and how we're rolling that out. And I'm going to explain some of how that looks like currently within the region. So in 2023, it was identified that actually the initial implementation would start within residential care. That's because there was already the theoretic approaches already embedded, and Lynsey talked about how the 5 trusts modelled that originally from 2008. So there was an understanding that we were all at a similar starting point across the region, and it aligned to the 2018 review of regional facilities that there needed to be one framework for the size of Northern Ireland rather than 5 different frameworks, and being able to enhance and develop that children who cross over into the regional facilities get the same experience of care rather than variations in that aligned to their own models. Next slide, please. So within this approach, there were 6 key areas then for residential to work on. These are 6 key areas, and I'm going to take you through them more kind of specifically. So that's just to highlight it. And Edel, if you would change slide for me, that would be great. So this is showing individual therapeutic plan and delivery, which is one of our focus areas. And we need to be really mindful when we're evidencing and showing you this, that there's a significant demographic change within the trusts, how the trusts are set up in terms of the scale and size of each of them, and then what their LAC population would look like. So you can see from this, Belfast Trust has 9 children's homes, so they have more children within their remit. Belfast and South Eastern would also have admission children's homes. So again, there's a higher turnover of young people in and out just due to the nature of the admission homes. Sorry, my computer has just timed out because I'm not turning it, sorry. So just to be mindful of when we're looking at these statistics, we wanted to highlight that actually when we go to EHP support, we're at different positions. So OT support, there's no occupational therapist or speech and language therapist currently within the Belfast Trust, and there's no speech and language therapist within the Western Trust. So that does impact the ability to make that whole robust, holistic assessment piece. We need to be mindful then when we're talking about these statistics that there has been different resource implications in terms of recruitment and retention of the staff teams, being able to fill the positions in order to provide these screening assessments. So we've young people, and when we talk about on the health and well-being process, so initial therapeutic plan and delivery, you'll find out if you attend further training later on in your careers, but there's a 12-week assessment period before we would complete a holistic plan. So when we're talking about the young people on the process, this is accessible to 100% of our LAC population, our residential population within residential care, but we're differentiating the change between those on the health and well-being plan because to note the resource implications, the changes within service provision, and the admissions in and out of the service, people currently being on sick and vacant posts. So actually over the year, there's been significant work to build upon and support the young people being within or on the health and well-being planning process. Next slide, please. One of our other key areas was workforce development then across the trusts. So that was essentially precursor training and an introduction into the ACEs and developing a trauma-sensitive approach to practice. We then run this session in terms of an introduction, and it's been shared with the teams mentioned here: residential care, leaving care and aftercare, safeguarding teams, LAC teams, VOIPIC, youth justice, intensive supports, scaffold TT LAC, fostering children with disability, and LAC nursing. So this introduction has been scaled across the workforce. We then build upon this session and hold a care experienced workshop. And this session has been offered to the residential teams and some of the aforementioned. Within the care experience workshop, we have a one-man show, and he is sharing the 7 voices of children with lived experience of care, and taking us through their journey from leaving their family home, entering fostering, short-term fostering to longer-term fostering, entering the residential system, and then moving into a leaving and aftercare placement. So really holding on some of those experiences. And within that workshop, we really want to go back to what were the 4 core concepts. What was the experience of those young people? Have things changed in terms of our own learning styles, and reflect on where we are as a service now, and hopefully help people shift some of their thinking to say, actually, maybe in practice. I've done X, Y, and Z, and moving forward, I will think about being more mindful of the young person's experiences of me at that time. We then run a full core training. So 60 to 90% of the residential workforce across Northern Ireland have completed this 4-day training block. And that's also been extended to our multidisciplinary teams because we need everyone's involvement, as we've discussed, in terms of rolling this out. It is a multidisciplinary approach with one team around the child, so everybody has access to the training. Within the training, it's 4 days, so it's quite substantial, and we look at developing a trauma-sensitive approach, developmental perspectives, understanding the roles of the AHPs, so the OT and the speech and language therapist, looking at relational working and the importance of relational working with our young people, staff support, what does that look like, and understanding the languages used in terms of trauma-informed practice, but also the impact that can have as you and your well-being as a worker in terms of vicarious trauma or secondary stress, and highlighting some of the language changes over the years. And then a day and a half of understanding what does health and well-being look like. What are the practicalities in writing a health and well-being plan for our young people, and what is expected of us as the workforce to support that. We then have reflective governance as one of our key areas, and I've touched on what reflective governance is. It's a meeting we meet once a month. We review the statistics and trends and analysis of what is being experienced within the children's homes and for specific individual children as identified. Within the 5 trusts, 4 of us are most definitely running it, and the Northern Trust are currently in progress of setting theirs up. And it's aligning what did we have as governance meetings already, and how does that shift to align to what our FITC wants are in terms of improving outcomes for the workforce and the young people. Next slide, please. Again, then these are another 3 of our key areas. So the narrative and life story delivery. And Lynsey touched on this earlier. So narrative work is essential for our young people, and that's not taken away. We all have conversations with our young people as social care and social work. It's about building a framework around how do we say things, and are we having to create a similar narrative? So when I share something, Lynsey's going to share the same information, and there's not the nuance or the difference. And including family within that narrative is really important. So trying to start with, why is the young person coming into residential care, or why is the young person leaving your family home? And being really clear in terms of the expectation about what that's looking like. Being able to share narratives at different points in a young person's life throughout their care experience. And then being able to enhance a life story piece. So at this moment in time, life story work is definitely a priority area for all of us. We haven't quite got to that because we've been focusing on potentially training the workforce, starting the individual health and wellbeing plans, commencing narrative work with the young people. But actually what we want is young people to have that experience of having life story when they leave care, that there's a clear trajectory of their experiences. Staff support and reflective practice we've touched on. So we just want to talk about that is an offer. Reflective practice is offered to all of the residential workforce and potentially other teams depending on what trust area you work in. And then looking at the need for, and if there's a need for, individual health and wellbeing plans for the teams or individual staff and what this looks like. And Belfast Trust have one running at the moment with our workforce. Also being able to draw upon supervision and the supervision policy that came out in 2024, looking at reflective supervision as well. All trust areas then have a peripatetic service team. They're all called something different. It could be doors, it could be reset. I can't remember some of the other names, but it's just about saying there is alternative supports specifically for our children and adolescents within residential care, and that's about bolstering the supports outside of the home teams and trying to build relationships within the community and access opportunities within the community that young people may not have particularly taken prior to now. Thank you. I'll actually swap this slide with the last slide, Edel, if you don't mind. So go to the next one, please. So this is our contact details for each respective trust. So it's Leanne Glover within the Belfast Trust, Lynsey, who's on the call today, for the Northern Trust, myself for the Southeastern Trust, Niamh McGowan for the Southern Trust, And then our Western Trust Implementation Lead is currently leaving us. So Gail Hegarty is the psychology lead within the Western Trust, and she would be a point of contact if anybody had any questions around what FITC is or what does that look like within our own respective trust areas. And I suppose we just wanted to open the floor then in terms of, have you any thoughts or questions? And I suppose use this opportunity if you wish while we're here.
I had a question, if that's okay, just around, I know it's not necessarily like residential care in the same way, but I just thinking about foster cares and like kind of equipping them as a key part of a child's story and their relationships. Would there be any training available to foster carers that would help introduce them to this therapeutic way of working, or to other maybe social workers who don't work within the Health and Social Care Trust but are working in various independent fostering agencies or nonprofit agencies elsewhere?
Hi, Hannah. That's a really good question, actually. In terms of our foster cares, FITC is peppered through the new standards for foster care. And I know they haven't been disseminated out widely, but you'll find those peppered within that moving forward. In terms of the wider implementation then, looking at how we can support our carers within trusts and wider services then in terms of our independent provision, and other services that would support their, we will be looking at that. I suppose presently we can't give you a definitive timeline as to when that will happen, but that will be part of the wider plan moving forward.
Well, that would be great, just because a lot of the training and things seems really, really good. And I just think I know a lot of foster carers would be really willing to engage, and even myself, I'd be interested, but if they might not be quite accessible yet for the wider workforce, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I suppose what we want to do and what's key is that in terms of the implementation moving forward, that we're moving together as a region rather than different trusts implementing it in different areas at different timeframes. So within the workshop that we've planned in April, that wider implementation discussion will happen, and some of the challenges and barriers that we know we need to overcome to have successful implementation across the region will be discussed there. So I've no doubt fostering and our independent services will form part of that discussion. So we'll keep you updated.
Oh, thank you. That's really helpful. Thanks very much.
No problem. Melanie, are you next?
Good to see. I know it was really interesting and useful, but probably just to kind of reinforce some of what Hannah is saying. I suppose what we're finding is that there is a little bit of people anticipating the FITC model being cascading down and rolled out for some time, and excitement about that and kind of but a little bit of frustration coming from fostering in particular, because they feel that I understand a bit about the timeline and the regional consistency, and I think that's really important, because in so many areas, isn't it, the inconsistency in every area doing something different has created barriers in itself. But I suppose even I think if they were clear that fostering was going to be the next area after residential and approximates, I think that would help, because I think the feeling is that things feel like you're in a vacuum and you're on hold for a little while, and there's no point in introducing other types of training. And I know that was discussed at the regional group for training for fostering services. So you're hearing a lot of that back through staff. So I just think it's useful for you to know that in terms of, I suppose the majority of our looked after population is in foster care, and that's the feedback we're getting from foster carers and from fostering staff. So it would be useful, I think, even just something in terms of being able to give some reassurances, I think.
Yeah, and as soon as we meet Melanie, and I suppose what's key to this is getting all trusts on board to make sure that the delivery plan will be successful in each trust. And there's challenges to that within each trust and nuances within each trust that aren't there across the region. And as part of some of the work the leads are doing within trust at the minute is about upskilling knowledge for staff, and some of the discussions will be about how the FITC model can be implemented into the training for our carers before even FITC is maybe fully implemented in other areas. So all those discussions will form part of the workshop in early April, and then the plan will come out thereafter. But very much we know, I've met with some of the foster carers at the policy engagement around the standards, and know that there's a lot of investment and interest in terms of getting involved in FITC and rolling it out into fostering and adoption services. So it's very much at the forefront of our mind, but I can't preempt agreement across all trusts that it's definitely going to be next for full implementation.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
Thanks. Any other questions? No, I think somebody put in the chat too, looking for the presentation. So it will be shared, Alison, won't it, on the NISC website?
Yes, and I put a wee message in to say, so we will share it and we'll break down the links to the videos as well.
Yeah.
Somebody was asking about that.
Just wanted to really say well done. It was really nice. Sorry, Suzanne from Queen's, for those that don't know you, and I was involved with Tom at the time of writing the framework and really pulling it together. And like you say, David, I mean, it's a really big challenge, isn't it? But I do think it is a wonderful opportunity to bring all those good practices that were happening in different parts of Northern Ireland together and try and reframe them and pull them together and look at international best practice out there and really, you know, find ways of talking about very important issues, like you say, David, in a way that's meaningful for children and young people, and it's also meaningful for staff. So it was great to hear about where it's at this point, and you know, just to hear all the different ideas being represented, and also just reflecting again, like others have said, the challenges is a big beast, because we know it's a really complex process, because there's so many people that are involved in care experience children's lives, and to having that common language. And it was really interesting, Melanie, to hear you speak of the hunger for training and foster care, and that was always the idea that because we know that children move through the care system, and they may be in residential for a little while, but then they may be in foster care, they may go back to their birth family or whatever, so the idea was to have that consistent language and framework that could move the big ideas. It might be implemented differently in different places, but the big ideas would remain the same. So just wishing you well, really, I suppose, all of that, wishing you well for the next steps, really.
Yeah, brilliant, Suzanne. Thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Was there anybody else? Because I suppose I'm mindful that David and Suzanne weren't able to lift their hand. If you have a question or a challenge, just shout it out so that we can give you a bit of time before we need to move on. No, is that everybody? Thanks, Alison, and thank you, everybody. Really appreciate you taking the time and being so so engaging in the discussion.
Thank you very much, everyone. If there's no more questions, we have recorded today, so it will be available on the website. We will send you out a little bit of a very short evaluation, which we would appreciate it if you could take a few minutes just to complete and return. And then when we have everything on the website, we will share the link to that resource, and that will be the video, the presentation, and we'll try and add the two links to the video separately so that you can access them quite easily. So thank you very much.